My nickname is unpatriotic. It's a terrible name to be called by. That's not true. It must have been some misunderstanding, that's all. The woman in front of me, struggling to find the right words, is my despised mother-in-law, Susan. Just minutes ago, I was told to leave the store by her and ended up leaving in tears. However, after persistent calls from Thomas and Susan, I returned to the store to find Susan, who lives to belittle me, looking panicked like never before. But just now, in a voice loud enough to fill the store, you said I was a stranger and to leave quickly. What did you mean by that? Please explain. All of this thanks to the person standing right there. My name is Caroline, a 32-year-old office worker. I've been married to Thomas for 4 years, but we don't have any children yet. My life changed dramatically after the death of Thomas's father, Kingston. At the time, we lived far from my in-laws' house in another state. Suddenly, the kind-hearted Kingston died of a heart attack. At Kingston's funeral, Thomas's uncle told him, "You're the youngest, but the only son. Eventually you'll return home, right? Make Mom feel at ease." A few months after Kingston's death, Thomas announced, "I'd applied for a transfer a while back and got moved to an office near home." This was reported after the fact. Of course, I protested. "Why would you decide something so important without consulting me?" To my words, "I thought you'd object. Sorry, Caroline. You don't like my mom very much, do you?" To that, Thomas replied. To add to Thomas's words, indeed, I dislike Susan, but she dislikes me even more. When we lived out of state, we only visited during long vacations due to work. Blake Kingston always said, "I'm happy just to see you a few times a year." But Susan was different. "Why can't you come at least once a month? It's not like you live overseas. Nancy visits twice a week, you know," she said, nagging. Thomas is the youngest of 3 siblings, with 2 older sisters, Nancy and Tracy. Tracy is quiet, but Nancy, both in appearance and personality, is a copy of Susan. Both married, they live near their parents' home. I can only smile bitterly thinking, of course Nancy can visit twice a week if she lives close by. Then Thomas said, "Don't compare us to Nancy. We have work, and it costs a lot to fly back every time." Thomas defended me, and Kingston mediated, so our relationship with Susan wasn't great, but manageable. I knew the main reason Susan disliked me: children. I'll never forget last summer's visit. "Why can't you have children yet?" she said, looking at my stomach. Sorry, but Nancy doesn't have any yet either." Both Nancy and Tracy, married before me, also don't have children. I thought she should worry about her daughters instead of me, but she said, "Nancy's married off, but you're different. As a daughter-in-law, you're expected to provide a proper heir." Susan's outdated remarks always frustrated me. Moreover, she said to me, "With the low birth rate nowadays, it's better to have more children for society. You don't want to be unpatriotic, do you?" That's what I said. Unpatriotic? Who even uses such a word? This woman really is strange. I was quite shocked by Susan's remark. However, when I heard Susan was ill, even Thomas seemed concerned, leading to our recent actions. I was, of course, conflicted. Following Thomas meant quitting my job and, more importantly, increased interactions with Susan. I even considered asking Thomas to go alone. But then I saw a post on social media by a friend whose husband cheated during a business trip. After much deliberation, I decided to go with Thomas, reasoning that we weren't going to live together anyway. Susan seemed delighted by my decision. 2 weeks later, Susan summoned me. "Caroline, let's have tea at my place." It was the first time I accepted such an unwelcome invitation, but I couldn't just ignore it. Arriving at the in-laws' house, Susan and Nancy greeted me. Seeing my two least favorite people, I already wanted to leave. Caroline, long time no see. Why haven't you visited since moving here? Nancy started with malicious intent. Susan sighed. Caroline, I was so happy you decided to live here, but it seems I was mistaken. You dislike me, don't you? I thought about saying yes I do, just to see her reaction, but of course I couldn't. I don't dislike you. It's just that I've been feeling unwell due to the new environment. This was true. I had been resting at home due to fatigue, and Thomas hadn't said anything. Why was I called here today? Just to listen to their nasty comments? Ridiculous. Susan says I dislike her, but isn't it the other way around? How can we get along under these circumstances? Nancy snapped. How can you speak to mother-in-law like that? Apologize to her. Say you're sorry. I thought she was annoying, but Susan's reaction was unexpected. You're right. I have been mean. I'm sorry, Caroline. Sorry about the child thing, too. I was being nosy. I braced myself for a scolding. I suspected some malice, but apparently there wasn't any. Even Nancy looked surprised. I just wanted to hold a grandchild. Nancy's husband is the cause, and Tracy seems to have fertility issues, so I hoped Thomas's wife would. So, that was Nancy and Tracy's secret. Despite knowing their secret, the fact remained that Susan had unfairly taken her frustrations out on me. I understand. Thomas and I have discussed having children, and we're thinking about it. Please, just leave us be for now. I bowed my head slightly, but I guess I had a conscience. All right, I'm sorry, but do visit us sometimes. Susan said so. Afterward, Susan and Nancy started watching TV and having tea as if the awkward atmosphere was a lie. I like this announcer. She talks so energetically and brightly. I glanced at the TV, showing Susan's favorite female announcer. She seemed famous locally. I wondered if I had been more outgoing. Would I have gotten along with them? A silly thought. I was glad to have shared my feelings today. Maybe things could improve with Susan and her family, but my hopes were soon shattered. That night, Thomas came home and immediately started yelling at me. I heard from Mom. You said you have no intention of getting along. Are you sane? Mom was crying. I couldn't understand what Thomas meant. Why did it turn out like this after our conversation today? Even when leaving, he waved goodbye with a smile. What's going on? Does he have a split personality? His smile seemed so genuine. Turns out that was probably a lie too. I'm past being astonished. Now I'm just scared. But the problem is Thomas is right in front of me. He totally believes Susan. Look, Thomas, that's a misunderstanding on Susan's part, you know? I told her I don't know how to be friends under these circumstances. You know about my relationship with Susan, right? How does that turn into I don't want to be friends? I tried to explain, but Thomas didn't seem convinced. But I also got a message from Nancy. She said you were a bit cheeky to Mom. After all the effort of moving here, didn't you come prepared? Following me here? Then she should be a bit more patient. Thomas looked at me as if to say she should be more patient. Indeed, I moved here for Thomas, but that's because I like him. I didn't move here just to appease Susan and Nancy, you know. I wanted to be with you, Thomas. I looked straight into Thomas's eyes and said so, but his attitude was unclear, hesitant. All right, I get it. Fine. Should we just get a divorce? Susan and the others probably won't ever like me. Maybe you should marry someone Susan approves of. The word divorce slipped out of my mouth, and for the first time, Thomas looked panicked. Wait, hold on a second. How does it jump to divorce? I just said I wanted you to get along better with my family. He doesn't understand that his family doesn't want to get along with me. That baffled me. However, it seemed Thomas didn't want a divorce. As the next day, he came back late from work, saying he talked to Susan. I talked to Mom.
She said it was a misunderstanding and apologized. What a fuss. And while talking to Mom today, I realized it's almost her birthday.
Just dismissing the issue with the misunderstanding and fuss, Thomas and Susan really irritated me. But then Thomas had a suggestion.
How about celebrating Susan's upcoming birthday at a fancy restaurant? And if we say it was your idea, maybe Mom's view of you will change.
Thomas said it as if it was a great plan, but I felt that the twisted-natured Susan wouldn't be genuinely pleased by such a gesture.
Fine, I'll handle the restaurant reservation. I'm thinking of inviting Nancy, and others too. So make it for 7, okay?
Okay, 7 it is. I was filled with unease, but the day of Susan's birthday arrived. However, Thomas had been acting strangely for about a week, unusually cold, responding to my conversations with just, "Not really," or "Yeah," which felt very unpleasant. I wondered if something was wrong at work, but soon I'd find out the reason. When we arrived at the restaurant, Susan, Nancy, and their spouses were already there, and Thomas and I were shown to our table. That's when a worker glanced at us, questioningly, making me feel uneasy. "Happy birthday, Susan," I said, but Susan didn't even look our way, instead saying, "Thank you all for gathering for me today. I'm blessed to be celebrated by my family." Did she just intentionally ignore me? Ridiculous, like a child. Nancy looked puzzled. "Huh? But I thought today was a family gathering." She glanced at me briefly. Tracy looked over worriedly. "Ah, I see. That's what this is. I'm being completely ignored. Then I'll ignore them right back and leave early." Just as I thought that, the worker approached our table awkwardly.
"I'm terribly sorry, but the reservation was for 6 people today."
"What? I distinctly reserved for 7. Did the restaurant staff make a mistake?" "No, it should be for 7. That's what I told them over the phone." As I spoke,
"Oh yes, but about a week ago, we received a call to change the number to 6 from a gentleman."
I was confused. Then Thomas said,
"Yes, please serve us for 6. Everyone's here now."
That's what he said. "What?" As I looked at Thomas in disbelief, he accused.
"I heard from Mom's side, Carolyn. You've been bad-mouthing our family a lot, saying I don't earn enough and am insensitive. You really had a lot to say, huh?"
It seemed that a week ago, when Thomas contacted Susan about this matter, she filled his head with all sorts of lies. Foolish Thomas, without a doubt, believed it all. Angry, he called the restaurant, pretending to be my husband, and changed the reservation from 7 to 6. The restaurant, hearing the same last name, didn't question it. How can he fall for the same trick in such a short time? Is he that foolish? Really? So what? There's no point in me being here, right? Why was I even invited? When I asked Thomas,
"You need to apologize to everyone here and reflect on your actions."
Incredibly, Thomas demanded that I apologize to my in-laws and then go home alone to reflect. Of course, my answer was, "No way. I can't admit and apologize for things I didn't say. And I don't need a foolish husband who doesn't believe his wife, but listens only to his mom's side." Tears of frustration welled up in my eyes. Why did I even follow this man? Seeing me, Thomas started to panic, but it was too late. Susan watched us, a smug smile on her face, as if our plan had succeeded. "Thomas, it's fine. Next time, marry a younger, more docile daughter-in-law. That way you might have kids. I'd be happier with that." Susan spoke to Thomas, who looked lost, not knowing whom to believe, and buried his head in his hands. Then Susan turned to me. "Caroline, why don't you go back to your parents' house? A daughter-in-law is ultimately an outsider. I can't see you as family. You're not charming at all, so please leave quickly." Susan said triumphantly, "I'd leave even without you telling me. I'd like to see someone who can get along with someone as twisted as you." I spat out my parting shot and left the restaurant. Thomas, head in hands, didn't follow. Tears of frustration came again. Then, as I hurried away, "Caroline, wait!" It was Tracy and her husband calling out. "Huh? Why?" I was surprised, and Tracy said, "I couldn't stand it anymore. Mom and Nancy haven't changed since forever. I knew right away the gossip about Caroline was false. When I said I'd cut ties, they just said, 'Do whatever you want. Sorry about Thomas. He's always been a puppet for Mom and Nancy.'" Tracy looked somewhat apologetic. "My husband's job is finally settling, and we're moving soon. Mom and them are mistaken, but we've decided not to have kids. Well, about Nancy's side, probably." Just then, my mobile phone rang. The caller ID showed Susan. I thought, like I'd answer, and as I was staring at it, a call from Thomas came in. "What now? Seriously?" As I muttered, Tracy and her husband exchanged looks. If you want, Caroline, how about going back to the restaurant? You might see something interesting." Saying so, they left, looking happy together. The phone kept ringing, and when I answered Thomas's call,
Caroline, I'm sorry. I didn't know it was a lie."
Thomas's voice sounded panicked, and there was a noisy commotion in the background. "It's too late to start over now. I'll send the divorce papers later, so I'm hanging up." As I tried to end the call,
Wait, can't you come back, please? It's a lifetime request."
Thomas's childish plea almost made me laugh, but curious about Tracy's words, I returned to the restaurant. There, a crowd had gathered around Thomas's table, and the person speaking to Susan with the microphone was her favorite female announcer. "No, that's not it. It's some kind of misunderstanding that..." Susan struggled to find the right words while Thomas and Nancy looked awkward. The announcer, pointing the microphone at her, asked, "But just now, you loudly said in the restaurant, 'You're an outsider, leave now.' What did you mean by that? Please explain in detail." Nancy's husband, according to Tracy, had left offended like the rest of us. "What's going on? This is strange." "Oh, that's right. Something about TV. When I made the reservation, I'd forgotten." As I stood dumbfounded, a worker noticed me and approached.
"It was quite a scene earlier. Actually, after that."
It turned out that there was a TV recording in the restaurant that day. Although the dining area was semi-private, conversations were easily overheard. "Sorry, can I have a moment for an interview?" Not long after I left, the famous announcer had shown up with a smile. Susan was overjoyed. "I'm a big fan. An interview? Absolutely." It seems that she was quite enthusiastic about it. But the interview topic was, "We're doing a special on daughter-in-law and mother-in-law issues. We heard the heated argument earlier. The daughter-in-law left crying. What happened?" Caught off guard by this unexpected question, the in-laws' faces turned pale. They couldn't possibly discuss the embarrassing truth about lying to drive away their son's wife. Then Thomas spotted me.
"Caroline, please. I can't let this shame be known. It was all my misunderstanding. Please."
Thomas looked pathetic, but of course, I had no love left for him. I quietly gazed at Susan. "Oh, we usually call each other Carrie. Carrie, come over here." Susan beckoned with a smile, so I approached silently. "You say you call each other Carrie, but how does the daughter-in-law see her mother-in-law?" When the microphone was pointed at me, "Carrie? I've never been called that. I have been called unpatriotic for not having children several times, though. That too is because of Thomas." Susan and Nancy looked shocked by my words. My husband and I hadn't tried to have children for over 2 years.
"Too tired. Not confident enough to raise children yet."
That's what I had always been told. Enough grounds for divorce, but when I first got sick and had to take leave from work, Thomas supported me. I liked his kindness, wanted to be with him. I followed him here, thinking a change of environment might help, but this was the result. No more tears left, no more attachment to this Thomas. Susan and Nancy looked embarrassed and pitiful. Seeing them like that gave me a bit of satisfaction. Is this going nationwide? I'll be looking forward to the broadcast. Talking with my favorite announcer and celebrating Susan's birthday. What a day. At my words, Susan looked like she might cry. I'm sorry. Please do something about this situation. Susan, Thomas, and Nancy looked at me with pleading eyes. I looked down on them quietly and said, "Well, since the daughter-in-law is an outsider, I guess I should leave. Goodbye." As I left the restaurant with a smile, still hearing shouts behind me, I walked away. In the end, Susan and her family didn't grant permission for the broadcast, so that footage never saw the light of day. Had it aired, it would have been a minor broadcasting incident. However, the incident was conspicuous enough and became the talk of the town, quickly spreading among relatives and acquaintances. After that day, I went back to my room, packed up, and returned to my parents' house. I sent the divorce papers to Thomas, but they weren't promptly returned. Thinking it might be time to involve a lawyer, Thomas unexpectedly showed up at my parents' house. My father, Stephen, dealt with him. Thomas deeply apologized, saying, "I plan to cut ties with my family. From now on, I'll only believe in Caroline." But it was too late for his words to mean anything. Stephen simply said to Thomas, "Why didn't you realize such a simple thing earlier? What do you think you've done to Caroline over these years? Just write the divorce papers and leave quickly." Stephen, usually a gentle man, spoke with a face filled with anger. The divorce papers Thomas handed over, written in shaky handwriting, were hard to read, but were successfully processed. Nancy, it turns out, was the real cause of their infertility, but had blamed her husband. Now close to divorce, she no longer had time to frequent her in-laws' house. Thomas returned to his family home, living with Susan. In a small town, they likely endured uncomfortable rumors for a while. But for me, it was a story of the past. 3 years after the divorce, I reconnected with a classmate from my hometown and remarried. Happily, we were soon blessed with a child. And now I have a 2-year-old daughter and am pregnant with our second. My mother-in-law is like an angel, so kind. Life is unpredictable, but right now, I am living a happy and fulfilling life.